Hello and welcome to the first in a series of webinars. The Council of State Governments Center for Innovation and Transformation in Education will present dealing with policy issues related to barriers to post-secondary access and post-secondary success. I'm Tim Weldon, an education policy analyst for the Council of State Governments. This series of webinars has its roots in a project initiated by CSG 3 years ago. At that time, we brought together some of the top national experts in the field of education policy, a sort of blue ribbon commission, if you will, under the heading the National Advisory Council for Post-Secondary Education Access. During our meetings, our scope broadened. We began looking not only at the policies and practices designed to increase academic and financial access to higher education, but also academic and financial success or retention among students already enrolled in college. Finally, our work morphed into yet another dimension, a category of non-academic / non-financial obstacles to post-secondary access and success that we call social barriers. Our advisory council has provided us recommendations on the most effective policies and practices addressing both inputs and outcomes. In other words, what strategies will result in more students being academically prepared for post-secondary education and more students graduating with either 2- or 4-year degrees. That's the essential background to today's topic, the first in a series of 5 webinars related to CSG's work in this area. Today we will examine what state policymakers are doing and what they can do to increase college and career readiness. Currently, too many students are graduating from high school, a diploma in hand, yet unprepared academically for post-secondary education, and that should not be the case. Approximately 40% of all incoming college students in this country require at least one remedial course, and at community colleges, the number is closer to 60%. They may have believed their high school education prepared them for post-secondary education, but the sad truth is that often is not the case. We are joined today by 3 panelists who will discuss the need for policies to drive practices to break down some of those barriers to post-secondary access. Our first presenter, Lucille Davey, is a senior policy advisor with the James B. Hunt Institute for Educational Leadership and Policy. We're also joined by Connecticut State Senator Beth Bayh, a leader in her state's legislature for reform measures to increase college preparedness. And our third presenter is Danville, Kentucky Public School Superintendent Carmen Coleman. Before we hear from them, I want to point out again to our audience that you are in listen-only mode. There's a box on your screen where you can submit questions anytime during this webinar. Once we hear from all of our panelists, we will ask as many of your questions as time permits. CSG and Lucille Davey have worked closely over the past few years to inform state policymakers about Common Core state standards and how those standards are intended to raise the bar on academic readiness for post-secondary education. This is a topic that has a number of policy implications, but Lucille, can you boil down to its simplest terms how you believe the Common Core state standards will result in more students graduating from high school with college readiness skills?
Absolutely. I think this is the first time that states have come together and said we're going to set the same set of expectations for our students regardless of where they live. There are multiple reasons for doing that. It really does help all the states ensure that the students who are graduating from their high schools will have the set of skills that matches the set of skills that both the workforce and entry-level college credit-bearing coursework require of our high school graduates. It's an opportunity for states to work together and really prepare standards, create and adopt standards that truly do align and match the skill set that's demanded of young people in the post-secondary world, whether they're going right into the workforce or whether they're going into a 2- or 4-year college program or whether they're going into some kind of specialized training or technical certificate program. They really all need the same set of minimum skills And I guess if we're on the slide about common standards, you're going to see some of the points that I have up there. Obviously, global competition has made this more urgent than ever before. Jobs can be done pretty much anywhere around the globe. They don't need to be done, locally. People can use computers, as many of us are doing right now, and communicating, throughout the country. We know that many, many students were graduating from high school, entering college, and being told that they didn't have the skills that were necessary to be able to succeed in a college English class or a college algebra or statistics class, or being able to write in the way that another major, classes in another major would demand of students. And knowing that we had these huge numbers of students who were being asked to take what are called remedial or developmental courses, it really does mean that if we can ensure that students enter college ready to take the credit-bearing coursework, they're more likely to succeed, because we have lots of data that shows that students who are asked to take remedial work oftentimes don't persist back into the program in the second year, and most of them will never obtain a credential, regardless of whether it's a certificate, a 2-year or a 4-year degree. Student mobility is another point that I think we can't overlook. We have families that move around the country. They move from not only within states, but they move from state to state. Sometimes those are done for family and personal reasons. Other times the jobs are required, the parents are required to move because of their jobs. We also have military students who are educated in states throughout the country whose parents are assigned to military bases. The children may be in local schools, adjacent or nearby the military base, and those families have moved their children around. Those children oftentimes have been shortchanged because the expectations varied so much from state to state. So this gives our students a better chance of knowing for sure that when they complete high school, they will have been taught and mastered the skill set that's demanded of them in post-secondary. Now, if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the specific changes in English language arts and in mathematics that I think help to ensure that young people will actually have those skills that they need to be successful in the post-secondary world. Some of these highlights of the English language arts standards represent the changes that have been made and the ways that these standards are really different than most existing state standards. Now, some states may have had an element or two of these, but really no state went into this kind of detail and depth and required this kind of rigor for all students by the time they finish 12th grade. So the first point is balancing between literature and informational text, and that's because the majority of reading in the workplace and in college is not literature. It is, in fact, nonfiction or informational text. Those kinds of materials are far more difficult for students to comprehend. Oftentimes they have more complex vocabulary. And so the standards are clear that students need to be exposed from the earliest grades, from elementary grades, not only to literature and fiction, but also to nonfiction texts. In addition, the standards are clear that there have to be increasing text complexity addressed from each grade, one to the next. There's lots of research that tells us that the complexity of what students is reading is just as important as how well they read it. And therefore, it is important to ensure that students are facing more and more difficult reading materials as they go from kindergarten up through 12th grade. And one of the things that they found when they were drafting the standards is they looked at what students were reading around the country is that we'd really lost our emphasis on text complexity. And in some cases, students at the high school level, were reading middle grade oriented materials, at a middle grade complexity level. Middle school students are still reading more elementary type materials. These standards require that by 11th and 12th grade, students are being exposed to the same kind of complexity in the difficulty of what they're reading as they will meet in the workplace and as they will be asked to read in college. The third big change is that writing is expanded. In the past, we've focused a lot on writing narratives where students write their personal opinions. They write about their own experiences or what they think and they believe. The writing is now expanded beyond the narrative. We still want them to write about their experiences and their beliefs and all that kind of thing, write creatively, etc. But we also want them to be able to write to explain, inform, and persuade people using evidence. So actually giving the evidence that allows them to draw the conclusion they've drawn or to make the statement that they're making, to be able to convince someone as to why, what it is that they're saying in their writing is something that ought to be looked at as being valid. Speaking and listening standards are focused on communication skills, and that is because the 21st century workforce, of course, demands that students be able to not only work with others, but to listen to what others are saying and to be able to work with them, and then also to be able to present. Many of us in our everyday lives are using PowerPoint and are asked to present to our colleagues, our peers. And so students in the standard, students will be asked to do that right up through the grades. They're also being asked to be able to research, so they've got to be able to look at lots of different information, sift through it, and determine what is it that applies to the problem that they're trying to solve or the question they're trying to answer. Finally, the other big change is that technology is integrated throughout these standards. They used to be standalone, where students would actually spend some time learning how to use the computer, quote unquote. And most times, they would learn how to do keyboarding. And now these standards really say that technology needs to be integrated in teaching and learning. So students are actually using the technology as a tool for learning, and that is a big shift. Now, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that the changes to the math standards are focused on, again, a handful of items. First is that there's greater focus and coherence in these standards. So there are fewer topics at each grade level, particularly from kindergarten through 8th grade, so that students can really focus in and master with deep understanding what it is that they're learning. We used to have what they call the mile wide, inch deep approach. I used to think of it as the drive-by approach to mathematics, where children would spend a few days on this topic and then move to something else for a few days and then move to something else for a few days. And the whole year would progress like that because there were so many different standards that had to be covered. The teacher would only be able to spend 2 or 3 days on a topic and then would have to move on to something else. There are far fewer topics, which allows the teacher to spend considerable time to ensure that students are really building deep understanding, recognizing that mathematics is a building block subject, that students need to have a really strong foundation in order to be successful as they progress into more and more complex and more difficult mathematics in the upper grades and in high school and obviously into college. There's a balance in these standards between computational fluency and conceptual understanding. And what does that mean? Well, basically it means that students still need to know the math facts, and they need to know the multiplication facts and the property of, distributive property and how operations work, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. They need to know that. They need to have it internalized. They need to be fluent with it. So they don't need to take out a piece of paper or use a calculator every time they have to do some simple computation. But they also need at the same time to have an understanding. So they can't just be memorizing the procedures. They have to know why it is that the process they're using or the procedure they're using works. So that if they understand it, then they can apply it when they get into those more complex math classes. It makes it easier for them to apply it and to use it. Many of us will remember the old adage, when you're dividing fractions, just invert and multiply. Most of us don't know why we did that. We just know that that's what we did, and we all could use it. But that doesn't help you oftentimes when you get into algebra and you have fractions that have variables in them, perhaps x over 1 plus x, and you want to add that to x plus 1 over x minus 3. Students have a lot of difficulty doing that if all they've memorized is invert and multiply, and they don't know how those variables interplay and why you're doing what you're doing, because you really have to use properties of arithmetic on a problem like that as well. There's an emphasis on real-world problem solving and applications so that students understand and see how mathematics is applicable to their everyday lives. We really wanted to see the utility of mathematics. We need to create more students who are interested in pursuing the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, if our nation is to remain competitive. So it's really important that they see the reason why it's important to learn mathematics. And they also need to know that everyone can learn mathematics. In the past, people have talked about the fact that, well, some of us are not good in math, and that's really not true. No one ever tells a child, oh, don't worry, our family isn't good at reading. But people oftentimes say to their kids, oh, don't worry, we're not good at math. And we really have to stop that. And this idea of children developing deep understanding and learning how the mathematics can apply to their everyday lives will help them really go past that notion. So finally, the skills and the standards are the floor and not the ceiling. And this is an important point in that the students need to know that they will be challenged and that this is the minimum at each grade level, that students can move faster, and if students can master the standards, they can move ahead to the next grade, and teachers should be differentiating instruction and doing that for them. It also means that although the standards contemplate most students taking algebra in the 9th grade having a very strong foundation laid between kindergarten and 8th grade, there are lots of children who will be prepared by the end of 7th grade to take algebra, and those students should do so, provided that they've actually mastered the K-8 standards. Now, the transition to the Common Core standards, many of these standards have a different cognitive demand. What does that mean? It really just means that the requirement of the standard is more rigorous than what it used to be. So this is where the understanding comes in. It's not enough for students to just say, well, I memorized how I did this. They have to be able to explain how they solved the problem. They have to be able to go into a text, for example, and find the evidence that supports the answer that they've selected. Curriculum, in many cases, will need to be written and rewritten and aligned to the new standards, and that's being done on a state-by-state basis. The materials that teachers are using need to be also aligned. In many cases, the books that they're using can still be used, but they will probably need to be supplemented, and much of the material will, in mathematics at the elementary level, will need to be eliminated because you're not covering as many standards at each grade level as we have in the past. I want to talk just for a minute about the new assessment system. There are two groups of states working together around the assessments, and there are about 20 states in each of those groups, a little more than 20. They are creating tests that will really help save money because they're doing the work together instead of doing it one by one. It should also allow us to have much more innovative testing opportunities for students. So they're going to be computer-based. There'll be some computerized scoring involved. It will allow for students to do what are called performance tasks. Those are bigger questions that students are asked. They're not just simple one-word or 2 or 3 sentence answers, but rather things like a research problem where students are given multiple texts to read, and then they're asked to do some research, and then to answer a question and to provide both an essay, but also an essay that includes evidence to support what they're saying. These tests will be used for accountability across the states. They will measure student growth, and there's a lot of opportunities for teachers to be supported in instruction through both of the assessment groups are creating all kinds of tools for teachers. Finally, there's also a technology readiness tool that can be utilized within a school district to determine whether or not the technology that exists, both the software and the hardware, is adequate for the online assessments. My final slide has a list of resources, and Tim can make these available to all of you, I'm sure, online. A list of resources, this is just really the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many resources available across the country now that 46 states are sharing these standards. Educators from throughout the country can share the work that they're doing, and teachers can share lessons and units, model lessons, assessment items that they're creating. They can share these things from and throughout the country because they're all working from the same set of student learning expectations in the Common Core standards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lucille. And before we hear from our next presenter, I do want to remind our audience that you can submit questions using the box on your screen, and we will ask those questions after we've heard from each of our panelists. Please indicate if you want to direct your question to any particular presenter. Senator Beth Bayh is co-chair of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee in Connecticut, and also serves on the Appropriations, Education, and Judiciary Committees. Senator Bayh received her bachelor's and master's degrees in child development from the University of New Hampshire, and is widely recognized as one of her state's leading authorities on early childhood education. This year, she sponsored legislation which was enacted and signed into law, Public Act 1240, an act concerning college readiness and completion. So, Senator Bayh, let's begin by asking, what do you see as the role of the legislature in adopting policies to promote college and career readiness? In other words, beyond approving funding for programs, how can and how should legislators be using their positions to ensure more students are academically prepared for college when they complete high school?
That's a great starting question. Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's an honor and to follow someone like Lucille with all that knowledge. I think that, well, you just said, I'm not from higher education. I have 30 years of work in early childhood education, and so I come with that perspective. And most states, I believe, have pretty much citizen legislatures where we come often from outside the area that we oversee, and we bring our expertise from our life. So I think one of the things, one of the roles of the legislature is, when you're looking at a system like a higher education system, is to take a view from the outside. That I'm not in higher education. But with that, you also have to listen to people who are working in that field and then look at the data. And I would say in the case of looking at college readiness and college completion, as a new chair of higher education, I was very shocked with the data in Connecticut to see how many students were getting stuck in remedial classes. And to back up, to some of what Lucille was talking about, quite shocked to see how many students were not prepared for college. So as chair of higher education in our second year, we took this on. It was something that the state's anti-poverty agency was very interested in, and had written a couple of reports. So at the beginning of last session, they called a meeting with community colleges, state universities, workforce development boards, small employers, probably 30 of us sitting around the table talking about this problem. So I think our role is to listen, to look at the data, and as an outsider, try to come up with policies that will improve things. So it's a very broad answer to your question. So I'll move on to the slides, and I really look forward to the questions. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. This particular forum was talking about college readiness, so I thought I would just start by saying, as a legislator, as a new legislator studying this, I see readiness as a different agenda from completion, but they very much overlap. And so, in my learning, I learned about different ways that we can assure that students are ready for college. And I do believe that some of the work on the Common Core that we just heard about is going to be critical. And I listed several other ways. I know in Massachusetts they're using an early warning index starting in 8th grade that says, look out, this child may not be ready for college. So there are a number of different ways that states deal with that. This particular legislation, while dealing with readiness at a level, which I'll get to when I talk about the bill, was very focused on trying to move students toward completion, to accelerating their path through community college. So we were looking at issues of particularly a community college system that only used one sort of high-stakes test about if students needed to get extra help before they'd be allowed to take a class, and so that's the AccuPlacer. And then there was one way, or predominantly one way, that we were delivering remediation, which was to offer a typical 3-credit class that students would take, and they would pay for 3 credits, but the credits wouldn't count toward their degree. So that became a roadblock. It was also could be discouraging, which I'll talk about in a minute. The other piece of completion that we took on as a legislature was a transfer in articulation. And as an outsider, I could look in Connecticut and see that our community colleges and the University of Connecticut had a very clearly articulated transfer agreement. But the relationship between the state universities and our community colleges, they did not have that sort of transfer and articulation. So we passed that there'd be a 30-credit transfer stack of credits that could go between. So that's another important thing to speed completion that we accomplished, which is separate from the bill you talked about, but something we've made great progress on. So those are all acceleration strategies. This was really important in Connecticut, if we can move on to the next slide, because we are a state that is really dependent on a highly educated workforce, and we have a lot of our students, 60 to 70%, who are getting stuck in this remedial system and not moving toward a degree. And a great number of these students were from our priority school districts in town. So We're third in the United States in the number of residents or percentage of residents with graduate degrees, and fourth in the percentage of residents with a bachelor's degree. And as important, it's very expensive to live in Connecticut. So there's a high cost of living, and to have a living wage in Connecticut, you pretty much are required to have an associate's or a bachelor's if you look, from up high. So this is important that we help the students get degrees so that they can, have economic viability as citizens, and that we as a state can continue to thrive with engineers that we need for many of the jobs in the state, and even some of those middle skill jobs. We have a lot of manufacturing jobs in Connecticut. So it's important for individuals, and it's important for us as a state. So I just thought, as a context, you can know why this would be so high on our agenda in Connecticut. And then I think the other background that's important to understand why we took this on is that the landscape in Connecticut is that we have a lot of students who achieve very high, and we have a lot of students who are not achieving. And I went to a presentation recently about sort of our future for education in Connecticut. And the vast majority of our workforce from the future is going to come from what we call priority school districts, or low-income school districts, where students are less likely to graduate from high school. They're less likely to graduate from college. They're more likely to get in the remedial track if they get to college, and when they get to college, hopefully. This is a real problem in Connecticut. So I think the rest of the slides are pretty self-explanatory. I wanted to put this slide in. If participants look at this slide, I think that it's really telling. So we are a state that is changing demographically, like all of our states, and this is not a bad thing, but we need to make sure that all of our students are achieving. And right now what's happening in Connecticut is that your degree attainment is very, very much impacted, that race and degree attainment are correlated. And so we really need to work on this as a state. And when we talk about remediation, if you look at the middle slide, for example, African American or black students, the 29%, those are the students who we want to get moved to a bachelor's degree or higher, and we need them to, and they need to move there for themselves. And so that is what's part of what's driving this legislation is, you'd have, if you could move those students who started college but didn't finish, you'd be at 47% of African American or black students at a degree. And you see the white, even the white as well. You have 25% who are getting stuck, and 21% of Hispanic students are being stuck. So I thought this slide sort of showed the opportunity if we can move more students through college. Because the students who are represented in the black band, they have started or they have some college, and some of them do have associates, but the majority do not. I also wanted to, and I think the next slide just sort of highlights the same concern, that over time, the group in Connecticut that is not achieving right now is going to be more and more of our workforce. And it's not an issue of capability. It's an issue of how our system is working right now and how many students we're losing in the pipeline. So we can go on to the next slide. So I wanted to just tell a little personal story here before we get to changing the law, and part of what drove me as a policymaker. I represent a community called West Hartford, Connecticut, which in fact mimics a state and has the largest achievement gap of any school district in Connecticut. Now, I was on the Board of Education in that community, and we moved to something called open access to AP, so advanced placement classes, that is classes for college credit. So in our community right now, any student who wants to can try any AP class they want to try. So a student could flunk Introduction or World History as a freshman and choose to take AP US History as a sophomore. So there are no barriers, and there's sort of explicitly stated by the principal at the beginning of the year to all freshmen is, I want you to try one AP class while you're here, and we want everyone to try one AP class. And you can imagine what happened when this was introduced in Connecticut, in West Hartford was that the teacher said, we can't just let anyone into AP classes. These students aren't ready. They'll water down the class and it won't work out, and this and that. And now, after over 10 years of this, both of our high schools have moved into the top 10 high schools in the state in terms of achievement, and that's overall ratings. And the teachers and leadership credit a lot of this to this open access to AP. And there are no teachers now who ever use the word that a kid is AP material or they're ready for an AP class. They all know that anyone who wants can try. And so coming from a school district like that where the idea of a student watering down a class is just beyond the scope, just not something that would ever be said, and then taking on the chair of higher ed and hearing that even if the student had an A in high school calculus, but if they didn't pass the AccuPlacer, they wouldn't be allowed to take introductory math at a community college, it just sort of went against this policy example I had in my town where we set a policy that said anyone who wants can try. So the remedial bill originally said that any student could try entry-level anything at a community college, and that did not go over big. But I think it's always important to talk about, you know, your personal story, and this is where I've been, is where I'm in a school district now where teachers see all students as capable. Sometimes they're lacking skills, but their job is to have the skills catch up with the intellect. Before I moved on to the next slide, I just wanted to share that story. So I come with that perspective as a new higher ed chair from my school board time, and I was looking at what was going on in Connecticut, which is we have, like many states, low graduation rates from our community colleges. And the data is not perfect, and sometimes people attack the data, but this is the data we have. It's not awful, and our Connecticut State universities did not have great graduation rates either. And then we also know that once students enter the remedial track, they're unlikely to graduate, and they're much less likely to graduate. And my co-chair has been chair of higher ed for much longer and has heard all the pilots and the new ways that the colleges were addressing this, and just said, enough. We've been doing pilots for 20 years, and we've made no gains. We're still at 10.8%. And you take that with what I talked about with the Connecticut workforce needs, and it's really a scary thing. And then those listeners are also dealing with college debt in their states, like we are, that students are graduating with college debt and student loan debt. And when we looked at what was happening, when you really look at what's happening with remediation and the 3 credit classes, is students are spending their Pell Grants, and of which they have limited semesters, and their student loans, and the vast majority aren't graduating. So now they, oh, sorry about the typo, team, they leave with debts, and their employment prospects are no different. So you add that sort of social justice issue, and it sort of all worked together to make us push very hard for this change. So I asked the Board of Regents to put together some data for me about students who took remedial classes and students who didn't take remedial classes, and look at their 2-, 3-, and 4-year graduation rates. And you can see that taking a remedial class makes students much less likely to complete a degree. And often when you talk to community college professors, you hear about students with complex lives. And so having to take 2 or 3 or 1 to 3 extra classes could be something that makes it difficult for students to persist. Students who came to us at public hearings really complained that the classes, the remedial classes, weren't as interesting, that the content was lacking and they weren't learning in context. I think Lucille's point about how math needs to be taught in context versus just skill-based, that reminds me so much of what the students were saying. And the other thing that students said when they came, and they were required to take a remedial class, even if they felt they could be successful, all depended on that AccuPlacer score. They said they thought they were going to college, and they get there, and they're doing more skills-based classes, and it was very discouraging, so they just dropped out. So, you know, these were some of the factors that came together. But I think the data is pretty compelling, and I'm happy to answer questions about it, you know, when I'm done. So Public Act 1240, or SB 40 as it's most famously known, is a bill that does a lot of different things to help with student completion. I think the most important thing to say, what has been misrepresented, I think, very badly in the national media, is that this somehow gets rid of remediation in Connecticut. It does not get rid of remediation. And I think, again, this is where policymakers have to make policy. What the policy says is you can't keep doing things the way you've been doing them, but you can continue to give students support. You're just going to change the way students are getting that support. And if any of the listeners have students in private colleges, you know that there's almost no such thing as remedial classes there. There's support, but parents aren't going to pay $50,000 a year and then pay for an extra year. And frankly, for the community college students, it may as well be $50,000. It's very expensive to take these classes. So what the bill does is it changes the way that remediation is delivered. It's really a delivery system change. So the students can still be assessed, but not on a single assessment. They can use the AccuPlacer, but they have to look at other data as well. And if students need a lot of help, they can receive what's called intensive intervention. It can be a 4 or 5 or 6 week class, and you know the colleges are working now to design what's going to work best given their student populations. Students who need some support but maybe not, aren't reading at the 3rd grade level, there will be embedded support, and one way that can be financed, for example, is a student enrolls in a 3-credit class, but if they need the embedded support, it's a 4-credit class, and that extra credit is used to support the extra instruction, but the class is moving them toward degree completion. The third part is that the bill allows for 1 semester of remedial classes. This was meant as an exemption when one of the community colleges came to me and talked about a special program they had, and as it's turning out, this has been a more critical part of the bill as the campuses try to figure out how to do this. So I think basically we will still be seeing some remedial classes, but just a limit of 1 semester. And then we set a date. You have to be ready by January of 2014. I already talked about the assessment. And then we're saying when the Common Core is adopted in Connecticut, you don't need the AccuPlacer. If a student graduates from a Connecticut high school, they can try an entry-level class, period. So that's another sort of line in the sand. And then we also set up a system to work on an early warning index, something like that they do in Massachusetts. So it was, the bill was comprehensive, many public hearings, and on top of that, probably 30 meetings with different groups to try to make sure we got it right. It was really constructed. After I said, well, let's just say anyone who wants can try any entry-level class, the community college presidents met with one of the presidents, and they helped to craft the legislation as well. So that's the bill. And I put a link to the bill for those of you that want to just go read the Public Act.
Thank you, Senator Bai. Sounds very,
and then I can stop now. There are 2 slides about the political context, sort of talk about the pros and cons, and so if you want to get on to questions, that's fine. So that's it. And if you want me to go into political context, I will.
Well, let's hear from Dr. Coleman right now, and before we do hear from Dr. Coleman, I do want to remind our audience that you can submit questions for any or all of our panelists. Simply type in your question on the box you see on your screen. Our final presenter is Dr. Carmen Coleman. Dr. Coleman has been an elementary teacher, principal, and director of elementary schools for Fayette County. That's the 2nd largest school district in Kentucky. She's in her 4th year now as superintendent for Danville Schools in Danville, Kentucky. Currently, the district is preparing to apply to become a district of innovation. I met Superintendent Coleman when we visited Danville High School to see how teachers are moving there toward project-based learning. And I've asked her to discuss with our audience how the role of the teacher is shifting or needs to shift to better prepare high school students to be successful in post-secondary education. Dr. Coleman, I suppose a good place to start is why isn't the way teachers have taught in the past good enough anymore.
Oh gosh, well you'll see on the first slide that you know, what would Rip Van Winkle say, and that's kind of almost a running joke in our district, because one of the things that, you know, I heard a story once that, or a speaker once say, you know, or pose the question, so if Rip Van Winkle woke up today after 100 years, if he was a real person, what would he recognize? And we determined that the only thing he would recognize would be schools. And that is because, as we know, schools are, you know, we're slow to change in education. And very often you still see the teacher front and center and students sitting passively. And yet we know that the world has changed very, very drastically. So I thought that I would share just a few of the things that we are talking about in our district, and I think from that you'll be able to see that there are tremendous implications for teacher preparation. So if you want to go on to the next slide, one of the things that I'm fortunate to be part of a network called the Global Education Leadership Program. And so one of the things that we do in this group is that we get to work with educators from all around the world. So one of the things that I have learned that I know for sure is that, you know, on every continent, people are rethinking how we organize learning, and how we need to best prepare kids for the future. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in Danville is college and career readiness is a great first goal, but we've got to talk about college and career success. And making sure kids have the perseverance and the grit to stay. And so some of the things that we've talked about, you know, that we try to keep our eye on is what is happening in the world of work. You know, what's happening to workforces and what do they need? And then, of course, how should learning be organized to meet those needs? So if you want to go on to the next slide, some of the things we know about global knowledge economies are that workers will have to learn rapidly to change their skill sets. We know that in the workforce, even today, often teams form quickly. People come together quickly to accomplish a task and then, you know, move on. We know that we have to be flexible. We have to be able to adapt. You know, technology has allowed us to become an anytime, anywhere society, and we know that global competence is extremely important. And I will tell you, I was just in a meeting in Brazil with this group last week, and I have never wished so badly to be fluent in more than one language. And it seems that we are, in America, we are in the minority in that we are not often. And so there is an important implication. And then just to go on, just to kind of set the stage here, I won't read all of this on the next slide, but one of the people in the group that I work with, her name is Valerie Hannon, and Valerie has had the opportunity to visit schools all around the world who are considered to be leading innovators in the way that they are changing what the learning experience looks like for students. And the buzzword right now is entrepreneurship. But I love how that first quote explains that a focus on entrepreneurship doesn't mean that everyone will or should start a business, but it's about creating a mindset open to the creation of new possibilities, you know, to helping students, you know, see what's possible and to see themselves as people who can make a difference. You know, there's lots of emphasis you'll see as you read through these that lots of emphasis on giving young people real-world experience. We talk a lot in our district about, and I'm always looking to see in classrooms who is doing the thinking. You know, the day of the teacher standing and delivering is over. As a matter of fact, one of the things that there's lots of change happening right now. Blended learning is something that you hear a lot, and so what we are trying to help our teachers do is to think about how they can use resources like the Khan Academy to do things that are currently taking their time so that they are freed up to do things that a student can't do online or with software. So you hear a lot about flip teaching, for example, where students might watch a lecture on their own time so that when they are actually with the teacher can be working directly with the students. So, if it can be done through software or, online, I mean, there are lots of tools out there to help us, but it's a really tough shift for teachers to make. And sometimes teachers feel threatened by the technology and by the resources. I think they feel that they will somehow be replaced, and that is not at all the case. As a matter of fact, our teachers who have really embraced blended learning and who have really embraced tools that are available have found that they know their students now better than ever, because they are able to take some of those things off their plate that took so much time to do. When the lecture is out there and available somewhere and the notes are there, then you don't have to do that. So think about, what teachers need to think about then, what their expertise and passion can bring to the table that before some of these resources were available, we just didn't have time to do. So that just to kind of frame some of the conversations. And if you want to move on, one of the things that right now that we struggle with in our district, and I think we're all struggling with, it seems, even across the globe, is that we're functioning in what we call, kind of a split screen world. We are still trying to maintain the old system, the traditional way of doing school. We still have many very traditional assessments. We still have, there are still some of those same traditional measures, and the kids are here today. And so we still have to have school every day. But at the same time, for example, in Kentucky, we are working toward, as Tim shared, becoming a district of innovation. This is a new piece of legislation that was passed in the spring, and it basically is intended to allow us to create our own charter without being a charter. So we are looking in our district at a completely different way of staffing, a completely different way of using time during the school day, a whole different way of assessing. So, the same kinds of things that we know that students need to be prepared for, and the same kinds of experiences we know that students need are just like the ones that those preparing to be teachers are going to need. They need to know that the day of standing and thinking that you possess all the knowledge that that the kids need, and you're going to stand and be the deliverer of content is, that's kind of over. There's certainly a time to come together, and there's certainly a time for direct instruction, but to think that is going to be the primary mode of teaching is very, very different. But back to the split screen, in thinking about teacher preparation, we'll move on. That next slide, one of the things that teachers in preparation programs have to be ready for is the kind of accountability that we have. Our teachers are held accountable for student growth, for goal setting, for data analysis, for differentiation, and I've if you want to put up just, I've given you some handouts that just to show, for example, this first sheet is something that our teachers were looking at yesterday, and this is for one particular student in one particular content area, and without going into too much detail, I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about, this student is at a 218, which correlates to a specific set of skills, and so, you see there her zone of proximal development, and so where instruction needs to occur so that student moves, the mode that instruction, might take, whether it's, whole group is appropriate or whether it's, independent or small group. And then if you wanted to show a couple other of those sheets that were with this, and you can't really see that, but this is a kind of a menu that corresponds to the numbers on that previous page. So just to show you the kind of detail that teachers are having to go into, and the kind of data they are having to analyze for each student, and the kind of preparation that it takes to make sure that each student really does grow academically as they should. So, we have to be innovative. And this kind of detail, I think, is just one more reason to say that teachers, we have to teach teachers in training to use the resources available to them. There's no way, I mean, the information I'm showing you is for one student for one content area. If you have a class of 28, I mean, we've got to let technology help us when it can help us. And so you can just show a couple more of those handouts if you want, but it just gives you a feel for, here's a class report for a teacher showing percentile levels. This is from an assessment we give 3 times a year. And so teachers are just, they're inundated with data. But there are tools available to help us learn to manage this. But if teachers aren't coming to us knowing that they are accountable for their students' learning, and kind of the day of I taught it but they didn't learn, that does not cut it anymore. I mean, I think teachers in training, we need to be very, very intentional about the seriousness and the importance of the jobs that they are, the career that they're about to embark upon. So you can go on to the next slide. That's just some more data about a class. But again, that's something our teachers looked at yesterday. Okay, so now we're going to switch back. We talk about the split screen. We kind of joke here that we feel a little schizophrenic because we go from that kind of detail for each student to innovation and how we know that school has to change. One of the things that we have done in our district is to have a real serious conversation about what does the Danville diploma, what does our diploma mean? And in its most literal sense, a diploma means the students can't come back, and that's sad, and it's tongue-in-cheek in a way, but it's true. That's so we wanted to be able to define that. So if you want to show that document, we've just defined 10 experiences and opportunities that we are going to be very intentional about, so that when our students leave us, our goal is eventually they will have an electronic portfolio of sorts to demonstrate. Kids, I don't think it's fair to ask kids to demonstrate what they can do to try to represent themselves on a flat piece of paper. And so for the post-secondary levels, I mean, our hope is that, they'll start to look at things like this, rather than simply test scores and simply GPAs. I mean, those are important. We know that, but there are also many, many students who have just exceptional talent but who need to be able to showcase that in different ways. So this is a document now that really guides our work. So we can go on. The last slide just talks about, so what are some, what are some implications as we've learned about, we have done lots of work in my district with schools like High Tech High School in San Diego. We've worked closely with, and this slide went a little crazy in translation, but we've worked closely with a couple schools in the I-Zone in New York. We also have worked with the consortium group in New York. We read Tony Wagner and really follow that work. Valerie Hannon, that I mentioned previously, is someone that we really look to her work, and of course Finland. They do some really fantastic things there, and we just believe in looking to the best to see what they're doing. And so, I guess for teacher preparation, I mean, they need to know that these are the kinds of conversations we are having, and the profession is going to be a very different one than perhaps, what it was when they were students themselves. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Carmen. I really do appreciate it. Senator Bai, I want to get you back in on this. I apologize. I jumped the gun and cut off your presentation, but let's see if we can bring back your slide dealing with the political context, which I think is very important. And I'd like to ask you briefly to discuss this slide.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, in Connecticut, we had an interesting context in that the year before we passed this reform, we had sort of collapsed our higher education system, combining the community colleges and the state university system and our online sort of credit connecting college, Charter Oak State College. We also had new leadership that was very steeped in the data, with staff who were steeped in data. And believe it or not, for the first time when we put the two systems together, we could look at data across systems. Before that, there were FERPA implications. So it allowed us to have a better view of the whole landscape, because before you could say, well, they might have graduated from a CSU and not the community college. And while I would say the data is still lacking in that we don't know if they ever graduate still, we do know better if they've graduated from any of the systems. So the data system improvements were important with that. I think the other thing is usually I think a bill like this would take 2, maybe 3 years to get through, and maybe it's one of the reasons right now we're dealing with some pushback and trying to make sure we have the policy right. It got through in 1 year because we had a very aggressive education reform in our K-12 system that seemed to take, in legislative terms, all the air out of the building. So this went through pretty easily because people were very focused on that. The other thing, I don't think it would have gotten through if it weren't for the Anti-Poverty Agency that was with us at the beginning and with us at the end when people started to say, oh, community colleges aren't going to be open to all students. Oh, you don't care about the poor, disenfranchised students. They were there to say, this is what we do full time. We're very concerned about low income and students who haven't typically had success and haven't been able to move up out of poverty, and we think this kind of reform is vital to help those students. And then the faculty unions were really on board. They were a part of constructing it, and we were in conversation with them, and I will continue to be in conversation with them. So that's how it got through. And then there were certainly a lot of people opposed to it, including the remedial faculty who, if you say we're getting rid of these classes, it's very it doesn't feel very good if that's what you've been doing. And we have incredibly committed faculty who've worked very hard with students, and there are some success stories. And back to your first question, as a policymaker, I'm looking at population level data, and faculty have individual student data or clinical experience, and so they'll say, I had this one student who needed 2 years of remediation and now has their master's from UConn, something, there are individual stories like that. But I'm trying to look at the data, population level data, and say, all right, it may be working for some, a small percentage, but the vast majority are not moving toward completion. So they were opposed. I think the community colleges were opposed to the collapsing of the systems, and so they thought that this was something that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had a Board of Regents, and so they were unhappy, and even though some of them had significant input on the bill, were still concerned about it. And then I don't think there's any denying that a good bit of money comes into the system and community colleges from remedial classes. You're charging 3 credits. It's mostly adjuncts who are teaching it, so they're much less expensive than regular faculty. And 60 to 70% of students are going to take those classes. So they were rightly concerned about, so where's this money going to come from if we don't have this income source? So that was another concern. And I think probably misplaced in this slide, saying community college presidents have strong relationships in the community and with their legislators. That's part of the political context. That can be supportive or non-supportive. So I'll stop there because the rest I think is pretty clear.
Okay. Well, that's all the time, unfortunately, we have for today's webinar. I do want to thank our panelists. You've all been wonderful. Lucille Davey, Senior Policy Advisor to the James B. Hunt Institute for Educational Leadership and Policy. Connecticut Senator Beth Bai and Carmen Coleman, Superintendent of Danville Independent School District in Kentucky. For our audience members, we have recorded today's webinar, and in the next few days we'll be posting it to CSG's Knowledge Center, where you can watch it. I believe all of our panelists have given us something to think about as we focus on what can be done through policy and practice to increase college readiness in this country. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Our next education webinar will focus on how state policy can promote success and higher retention rates in post-secondary education. That's all for now. Thank all of you, and have a great rest of your day.